is simply to give an update, provide select observations, and to allow the city to make a decision as to the direction of our work. So the presentation will include information regarding the project and scope, where we are in the process, information gathering, and the procedures that we went through to do that. And then we will share observations as to the procurement and expense approval, information regarding Just One management, the payments and services that were provided, the discrepancies that we've seen in some of the records that were furnished, and the collection of revenues and sponsorship funds. And then we'll go into the city's responsibility for expense payments. And next steps is really just going to be the decision to be made by the city.
Randy, the presentation that I'm seeing on the screen is not the slide you were speaking on. It's actually the third one. Okay. So I'm not sure what presentation mode you're in, but it's not that's not the correct slide, and I don't think they're seeing it there either.
Is the slide showing now engagement scope?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think you're in slideshow mode.
Okay, is the slide that is displaying, does it say discussion points?
No.
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 There you go.
Okay, I'm just going to display it in this view, if this is okay with everybody else.
That's fine.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so the discussion points I just went through, and so I'm going to start with the scope of the presentation. So we were brought in to review the expenses and the details surrounding the 57 South Music Festival. The purpose of our review is to identify fraud, theft, waste, abuse, or collusion. And then we were asked to look at the policies and regulations to ensure compliance with those, and to identify any lack of diligence on behalf of individuals involved in festival planning and procurement that were detrimental to the city's best interest. And our scope period is May 1, 2023 through the date of the festival and a little bit thereafter. And so with our forensic audit work plan, at this stage, we've really received all of the information that the city has available to provide us in response to what we've requested. Most recently, we received quite a few bank records and check copies for the general fund. And so we have taken that information and been able to export that into our model. And the review of that information is nearing completion. And so we were using that data to blend in with the other details that we have been reviewing, and to kind of pull our final observations together. And just going into the information gathering and what's transpired since we were initially brought on. An initial request went out that was comprehensive. It was kind of all-inclusive and asked for a number of items that we would be interested in reviewing. We received certain portions of that information that was responsive to the request, although the information provided was incomplete. On November 21st, we sent an updated request, and we identified specific items that we wanted to review, and really tried to hone in on what is really of high importance to us. And we broke it out into two parts, one being a request specific to Eagle Pass, and another being a request for Just One management. And part of where we are and the issue that we are facing currently is the information that is subject to the possession and control of Just One management. And so we had certain pieces of information that we were able to review and observe detail and activities that occurred and identify certain discrepancies. However, a lot of the information that we would want to complete a full and comprehensive review would be that information that is in Just One management's possession. And so the timeline of receiving information and really kind of the most recent events that occurred and getting the documents collected that we needed lead up to this request here that went out on the 21st. And so we had the updated request go out. We received records from IT on February 17th. So there was a pretty good period of time that we were awaiting additional information, but we did at kind of mid-February start to receive all of the remaining records that were responsive to the request specific to the city of Eagle Pass. Now, the records that we need from Just One management, those remain outstanding, and that is part of this conversation that we are having today. And so the additional records provided, there was an Excel ledger provided for the city, and the Excel ledger provided for fiscal year 24 appears to be missing certain transactions. And so we wanted to get the bank statements and the enclosures and information so that we could extract the detail and do a comparison and understand what may be missing and have a complete picture as to funds that went out from the general fund to pay festival related expenses. And so the information provided included account statements for IBC Bank, PNC Bank, and in addition to that, we received check copies, which were rather voluminous. However, we have done the data extraction, and there are about 11,500 bank transactions that are being pulled into our analysis, and the review of that is in process. We also received emails that had certain select search terms applied to them, and we have reviewed those emails, and that will also be tied into our final results. Now, with procurement, these are again just general observations. These are not our final findings, but just items to point out. Looking at the policies stated by the city, we did not receive any evidence that a conflict of interest questionnaire was submitted by the management company Just One. A question as to whether or not Just One utilized the city's tax-exempt status to make payments for expenses and whether reimbursement may be owed is also a question that we will be looking at. As far as securing the manager from the get-go and bringing that group or that company in to do the work and direct and manage the festival itself, looking at the way that it was done in accordance with the purchasing policies and procedures, it seems to us that this may have been done in an improper form, and an RFQ would have been the more appropriate route to have gone to select a professional service provider based on what we're seeing and what the policy states itself. And so the event manager, was not only providing, the management services, but was also securing vendors, suppliers, contractors on behalf of the city. And there was not a lot of oversight as to the direction that the manager was going. And so the manager had a lot of free will to, exercise discretion without much oversight. And so that will be something else that will be brought into our final report and findings. And one item that we wanted to point out is that we don't necessarily see a violation of state or federal laws that would apply if there was a break in policy. That would only apply to the extent federal funds, state or federal funds were applied to finance the festival itself. Okay, so on this slide, it is just providing a timeline as to the management company selection, funds that were dispersed to the management company leading up to the point in time the contract was executed, and some additional details that are being provided. And so what's important to point out is that Just One Management was formed on a Saturday, May 27th. The ad for the manager for the festival was posted in a local publication on June 1st and on June 4th, with a submission date of June 5th at 3 p.m. And so that was a pretty small window to provide a response. The timing of the formation of the management company in conjunction with when the ad was posted and submission date is questionable itself. The management company was paid $1.3 million before a contract was actually executed. There were some back and forth communications involving the contract, letter of intent that went out prior to. Needless to say, the management company was receiving funds to use to secure vendors and talent of 1.3 before the actual contract. And then there was an addendum to the contract just prior to the festival start, increasing the percentage amount that the manager would receive for beverage sales, and we're a little unclear as to why that addendum was put into place. Okay, so with Just One, certain items that will be pointed out in our findings. Just One uses a number of different names that we've identified on invoices going under Just One Management, production, marketing, demonstrating that perhaps it's performing in different roles outside of just being a management company. And then I'm just going to put a slide in that shows the presentation to council by Just One Management, giving expectations that were not necessarily realistic. And then the contract provisions that we've reviewed, many of those are strongly in favor of the management company, and the safeguards for the city seem to be minimal. And so the contract provisions is really something that is, of importance in looking at the big picture and what's transpired. The compensation that was paid to Just One Management, we've seen fees that exceed the amount stated in the contract. The Just One Management was also receiving a share of beverage and merchandising revenues, and schedules provided don't necessarily match what the contract and contract addendum are stating. With respect to the expenses that have been paid by the management company, we've seen discrepancies in actual supplier charges versus the amounts the management company invoiced to the city. There have been expense reports that have been provided with items presented to the city for payment that don't match an amount. We've seen that actual cost, the talent fees and other expenses that were incurred can't really be determined without additional information from the management company. And we've never received any information as to what those actual fees were. We do not have any contracts for the various artists that performed at the festival, and we're not able to verify the amounts that those artists and or their agents received for performing. We've also seen certain instances where payments were tendered before being approved by the city. and that would be just part of our report and part of what we would be demonstrating as to maybe lapses in procedure and what was occurring on that end. And as far as revenue collection, the revenues were relatively minimal, but that was all being handled by the management company. And it appears, based on our observation, that some of those funds may have been held back and were subject to a further discussion that was with the city as to what was outstanding and from each end. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the presentation to council. And so this is one of the slides from that presentation reflecting that anticipated ticket sales would have been close to 2.8 million, and other sales from various sources, sponsorship, parking, vendors, etc., would have led to revenues totaling close to $4 million, which is a significant difference from what was actually collected. And so just looking at this slide, the question comes to mind as to, what is this data based on? Were these just randomly selected amounts? We haven't seen any evidence that a proper viability study was performed prior to getting into the festival planning. And historical data from similar events should have been considered, and the information that was being reflected to the city and presented to the city by the management company is questionable. Okay, and so I've kind of already hit on this a little bit, but we will go through the compensation that the contract states that the management company should have been receiving versus the payments that we have identified. And so we've seen certain fees that seem to have exceeded the 6% amount. The contract has some language in it that is somewhat ambiguous as to what talent buying fees and other expenditures and services, what that represents in terms of payments being dispersed to the management company. We're a little unclear as to why there was an addendum executed in favor of the management company increasing the percentage. And our full report will go through in detail, everything that we've seen with respect to the compensation paid to the management company. Okay, and so this is just some additional information. The contract provisions seem to safeguard certain records that the management company would retain, and legal counsel would really need to kind of go through the contract and determine, what remedies the city has, and getting the management company to perform and to relinquish certain pieces of information. And so this just kind of points out, what is stated in the contract, and again, this would require interpretation by the counsel for the city to determine what is the right plan of action. Okay, so this is again a part of the contract provisions, and this is specific to the artist contracts, and the artist contracts seem to be a bit of a sticking point for the management company. We've seen other communications discussing why the artist contracts would not be provided by the management company to verify the costs. This being an important factor because one of the greatest expenses of the festival itself was the talent that was secured to perform at the festival. And for us to be able to verify what was actually paid to those artists versus the amounts the city was charged for those artists is difficult for us to do without the contracts that would spell it out and tell us exactly what those amounts would have been. And so this slide here, just demonstrates exactly how much was paid to the management company. and how it's broken out. And this is just according to Just One management, these categories here at the top. And this slide corresponds with this slide here. And this slide demonstrates how Just One was categorizing these expenses on various invoices that were being sent to the city. And so this is kind of comprehensive of those invoices and what the breakdown is. I've highlighted here just, what the talent fees are, and that's, close to $1.3 million itself. This is an amount that we're not able to verify at this point based off of the information that's available to us. Also, over in this column, we've seen evidence that certain checks were paid prior to an approval, and this was kind of early on in the festival planning process. Again, something that we would go into more detail in our report about. Okay, and so this slide here, this is just meant to demonstrate some of the discrepancies that we've seen as to the amounts that Just One was charging to the city versus what the individual vendors' invoices were reflecting. And just based off of these three here that are being represented on the slide, we've seen a discrepancy of over $200,000 in the amounts that were being charged by the vendors versus the amounts the management company was charging to the city. And so this slide here is just to provide an example. So this is an example of an invoice that was provided by Just One Management. And here is a corresponding invoice from Texas AVL. And the amount on this invoice, I know it may be hard to see, was $345,750. And the amount on the invoice from Texas AVL was $319K, a difference of roughly $26K. Other discrepancies that we've seen in records provided to support expenses by Just One Management would include this breakdown of payments that were being made. And so this is to be a ledger of expenses that were being paid that was being provided and furnished directly by Just One Management. And what we've noticed going through various versions of documents that look like this is that there are multiple uses of the same check copy in this data. And so this makes these slips provided questionable, and they're not official bank records. They're not issued by the financial institutions. These appear to have been prepared. It's kind of hard to say, but it looks like the management company actually prepared these schedules, and the fact that we're seeing multiple check copy numbers and different variations of this is questionable itself. Okay, so in terms of revenues, ticketing sales, based off of schedules provided that we've reviewed at this point, are $208K. The ticketing was facilitated by Just One Management through, believe ShowClicks being the main one. We've also seen evidence that Event Ticket Center was also used. There may have been secondhand resale tickets on this site specifically, but this was all managed and controlled by the management company. Also with beverage sales and similar to merchandising sales, the amounts, and this slide doesn't have the exact amount that was received, and so that would be part of our report. But the schedule specifically just shows that Just One was making an allocation to itself of 25% of both alcohol and non-alcoholic beverages, and that does not correspond with what the contract states. And so this is the amount that Just One was holding back, or believed it was entitled to. That does not seem to be correct, and so that is something that we are looking to get to the bottom of. Another question being with the sponsorship funds, what was actually collected by Just One, what other sponsorship dollars were received versus maybe services that were provided in lieu of sponsorship dollars. And that would be something that we would want to get additional information on to make a further determination. Okay, and so the information that we would want from Just One Management, certainly we would want the contracts for the talent service providers, and the contractors and operators. We have bits and pieces of this information, but we do not have a complete set of this information, and this would be information that's subject to the control of the management company. To the extent complete bookkeeping records were maintained by the management company, we would want to review those. We would want to review the statements and enclosures, which are unredacted, which received and tendered payments in association with the festival, any correspondence with city employees and vendors, and specific source documents for all sales proceeds and revenues. Okay, and this last slide here is really just showing the city's responsibilities were outside of the monies that were going to the management company. This slide kind of speaks for itself, and based off of the recent information provided in our review of the bank statements, we are looking to quantify what this amount is, and that would be included in our final report. And so that concludes the presentation for me.
As you can see, Mayor and council members, there's a lot of information that is missing in this preliminary discussion, if you will, and that's one of the reasons we provided the letter to you for the next steps on what direction the city would like us to take, and we'll stand for any questions that you have.
Is legal action necessary to get the additional documents?
That would be something that you would have to discuss with your legal counsel, but I believe it probably would be.
Questions?
In the funds disbursed before approval, I didn't see a check made for Noches Mexicanas, and I remember providing that.
Okay, so I can give you information on that. So one of the check payments does include the Noches Mexicanas event. I could get a breakdown of that. It's not represented on the slide specifically, and I would need to go back into the detail to get, which payment applied to that. But I can definitely get that for you.
Yeah, because that was not part of the contract. Thank you.
Obviously, council members, the final report will be much more detailed than this, and we'll provide specific information in regards to it that we'll provide names in the report to you in reference to certain transactions that this council will have to decide whether they wish to have it redacted before it's released to public.
When do we expect that final report?
That was a determination for you folks.